A person pushes a shopping cart down a grocery store aisle, picking up milk, eggs, fruit, and cereal. The person stands in line at the checkout, unloading groceries onto the conveyor belt. The cashier scans the items while the total appears on the screen. The shopper freezes, staring at the total in disbelief. The shopper turns to the cashier and asks if something was scanned twice. The cashier looks at the shopper, deadpan, and calmly replies that the price is correct. The shopper stands stunned, holding a bag of apples, as the reality sinks in. Nick puts down an apple and leans in, addressing the camera directly. Nick speaks intimately to the camera, sharing a relatable moment about rising prices, a montage of different people experiencing sticker shock at the gas pump. A person looks at a used car lot, surprised at the high price of an old Honda Civic. A person sits at a desk, reviewing monthly bills and feeling anxious. A treadmill speeds up as a person runs, struggling to keep up. People blame corporate greed and supply chains while watching the news. A shadowy, unseen force is represented as quietly draining money from a bank account. A calendar flips rapidly, showing time passing as money disappears from a bank account. Hand signs paperwork, but the invisible tax is never mentioned. A pay stub is shown, but the invisible tax is nowhere to be seen. A person looks confused as their wealth shrinks without spending any money. Nick addresses the camera, warning about the invisible tax and its dangers. Nick gestures dramatically, emphasizing the importance of understanding the invisible tax. Upbeat intro music plays as animated coins and dollar bills bounce across the screen. A cha-ching sound effect plays as the video transitions to the next segment. Nick stands in front of a whiteboard, uncapping a black marker. Nick introduces himself, explaining his obsession with how money affects people. Nick addresses viewers who feel like they're doing everything right but still can't get ahead. A subscribe button and thumbs up icon appear on screen as Nick encourages engagement. Nick writes "invisible tax" on the whiteboard in bold letters. Nick asks if viewers think he's talking about inflation. A thought bubble appears over Nick's head with the word inflation and images of rising prices. Nick looks skeptical, questioning if people really understand inflation. Nick explains that inflation is not just about prices going up. A split screen shows an apple on one side and a shrinking dollar bill on the other. Nick clarifies that inflation is about money becoming worthless, not just things getting expensive. A visual comparison shows the same apple with a higher price tag and a smaller pile of cash. Nick emphasizes the importance of this distinction for personal finances. Nick points to the whiteboard, promising to cover the math behind inflation. Graph appears, showing the decline of purchasing power over time. Nick warns that the upcoming numbers will be shocking and anger-inducing. Nick mentions the psychological aspect, introducing the concept of money illusion. A cartoon brain flashes on screen. Labeled money illusion, a person happily receives a raise, but their purchasing power secretly decreases. Nick promises to show viewers how to opt out of the invisible tax. A checklist appears on the whiteboard. Math, psychology, solutions. Nick smiles confidently, assuring viewers that opting out is possible, at least mostly. Nick claps his hands together, signaling the start of the main content. The screen transitions with a bold title, "The Invisible Tax Explained." A montage teases upcoming scenes, graphs, psychological tricks, and practical tips. Nick stands ready at the whiteboard, marker in hand, prepared to dive into the details. Nick stands in front of a classroom, preparing to discuss the math behind inflation. He gestures to a whiteboard, ready to use a real-world example. Nick announces that he will use cars as an example to illustrate his point. He recalls the year 2000, emphasizing how long ago it feels. A visual of a new car from the year 2000 appears, with a price tag of $21,850. Nick explains that $21,850 was a significant but attainable amount for a middle-class salary. He fast-forwards to 2024, asking the audience to guess the current average price of a new car. Nick writes $48,000 plus on the board in big red letters. He explains that the average new car price is pushing $48,000, sometimes even $50,000. Nick introduces the concept of the invisible tax. He inputs $21,850 from the year 2000 into an inflation calculator. A visual comparison appears. The inflation-adjusted price should be $39,000. Nick points out that the actual price is $48,000, not $39,000. He asks where the extra $9,000 went. Nick dramatically states that the $9,000 vanished. He explains that this is the first layer of the invisible tax. Nick contrasts official government inflation numbers with harsh reality. He decides to look at an even bigger time frame. 1990. A crisp $100 bill from 1990 is shown being placed in a safe. The safe is opened in the present day, revealing the same $100 bill. Nick explains that the bill still says $100, but its purchasing power has dropped. A graphic shows that 57% of purchasing power has been lost. Nick underlines 57% aggressively on the board. He explains that saving cash for 34 years results in losing more than half its value. Nick describes the outrage people would feel if the government openly took 57% of their savings. He contrasts the silent, gradual loss with dramatic reactions to overt theft. Nick explains that this is not nostalgia, but actual theft. He defines the invisible tax as a transfer of wealth from savers to borrowers. Nick explains how expanding the money supply hurts those who hold cash. He emphasizes that the value of labor from 1990 has been diluted. Nick anticipates the audience's thoughts. But I invest. I get raises. I'm keeping up. He challenges the assumption that people are keeping up with inflation. Nick transitions to the psychological aspect, calling it even more dangerous than the math. The lighting dims as Nick sits at his desk, signaling a serious tone. Nick introduces the concept of money illusion from behavioral economics. He credits Irving Fisher for coining the term in the 1920s. Nick explains that humans think in nominal terms, not real terms. He defines nominal as the number on paper and real as purchasing power. It presents two scenarios for the audience to consider. Scenario A: 0% inflation, but a 2% pay cut. Scenario B: 4% inflation, but a 2% pay raise. Nick pauses, letting the audience react emotionally. He explains that most people feel angry about scenario A and okay about scenario B. Nick reveals that both scenarios result in being 2% poorer. He emphasizes that the outcome is mathematically identical. Nick explains why scenario B feels better. Money illusion. He says people are addicted to seeing numbers go up. Nick explains that this addiction causes people to tolerate the invisible tax. He gives an example. A house bought for $300,000 is now worth $500,000. He asks if people are actually richer if prices for essentials have also skyrocketed. Nick stands up animated and returns to the whiteboard. He explains that wealthy people care about purchasing power, not nominal dollars. Nick compares storing wealth in cash to storing water in a bucket with a hole. He explains that hard work and saving are like pouring water in, but inflation drains it out. Nick warns that the hole in the bucket is getting bigger. A young child receives a $50 bond or a crisp bill from their grandma, who advises them to save it for a rainy day. The child looks at the money, pondering grandma's advice. Grandma smiles warmly, reinforcing the idea that cash is safe. A visual comparison. Cash is shown as stable and secure in the short term. A person worries about paying rent next month, clutching cash for security. A thought bubble shows the risk of having rent money in the stock market, imagining a 10% drop overnight. A time-lapse montage, cash sitting untouched over 20 to 30 years. The value of cash visibly decreases over time, with inflation eroding its worth. A chart appears, showing cash losing value with 100% certainty over decades. Stocks, real estate, and gold are shown as assets that generally appreciate or hold value. Cash is depicted as always declining in value, contrasted with other assets. Nick enters the scene, referencing a study by RBC Global Asset Management. A visual of two paths, one person saving cash, another investing in a balanced portfolio. The cash saver struggles to reach a $500,000 goal, having to contribute nearly 50% more money. The investor's portfolio grows steadily, reaching the goal with less effort. A graphic illustrates the concept of cash drag and the extra work required for cash savers. Nick explains the invisible tax on cash holdings. Person is shown working harder, sweating, to make up for lazy money. Nick sighs, leaning against a desk, acknowledging fears about the stock market. People imagine worst-case scenarios: market crashes, recessions, split scene. One person anxiously watching their portfolio drop 20% in a bear market. Another person wakes up at age 65 shocked at their savings by much less than expected. A visual metaphor. The volatility of the market is a roller coaster ride. The invisible tax is shown as a shadow looming over cash savers. Nick claps his hands, shifting to the action plan. A 3-step playbook appears on screen. Own hard assets. Use good debt. Increase income velocity. Step 1. A person converts cash into assets, buying index funds, purchasing a home, investing in gold. A government prints more money, but the supply of assets remains constant. Asset prices rise as more money chases the same goods. Split. Cash holders lose purchasing power. Asset owners gain wealth. A montage of the rich getting richer during the pandemic, while cash holders struggle. Nick encourages viewers to become owners, not just savers. Step 2. Nick warns against consumer debt, showing credit cards and high-interest loans is dangerous. A person takes out a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, visualizing the impact of inflation. Inflation rises, making mortgage payments easier to handle over time. Parents from the 1980s-90s pay $500 a month for a house, which becomes a trivial amount decades later. Debt shrinks relative to income as inflation erodes its real value. The invisible tax works in favor of those with fixed-rate debt. Step 3. Nick emphasizes the need to increase income velocity. A person receives a raise that doesn't keep up with inflation, feeling frustrated. The employee confronts their boss, negotiating for a real raise based on CPI and cost of living. Split. One person accepts a nominal raise, another moves to a better-paying job. Loyalty to a stagnant paycheck is shown as a financial trap. Nick leans back, addressing common objections from viewers. A viewer hesitates to invest, fearing a market bubble and waiting for a crash. A timeline shows inflation eroding cash while the market rises, even before a correction. A quote from Peter Lynch appears: "More money lost waiting for corrections than in corrections themselves." Another viewer claims they don't have enough money to invest. Nick demonstrates starting with just $50, emphasizing the importance of habit over amount. Nick walks to a whiteboard, circling the invisible tax for emphasis. A person shops for groceries, noticing rising prices and feeling the impact of inflation. The shopper refrains from blaming the cashier, instead feeling motivated to protect their wealth. A jar of cash loses value over time, unable to buy the same amount of bread decades later. A visual of currency designed to lose value, encouraging spending and investing. A person hoards cash under their mattress, looking worried as its value declines. Nick urges viewers to educate themselves, buy assets, use debt wisely, stop paying the invisible tax. Nick points to the camera, encouraging viewers to share the message. A call to action. Nick invites viewers to watch his next video on his investment portfolio. Nick waves goodbye, thanking viewers for watching.